Pass it.
Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to Pitt County Planning Board meeting today. I'd like to welcome the people in the audience as well as the one that's watching us over the cable network. Could we get the roll call, please?
Faye Barefoot.
Here.
Brad Guth.
Here.
R.J. Hamby. Ricky Hines.
Here.
Clayton Malloy Jr. Matt Nobles.
Here.
Johnny Penner.
Here.
Maria Rogerson.
Here.
Kenneth Ross. And Danny Smith.
Here.
Okay, thank you, Tam. Next up, we will have the prayer by Mr. Penner, and I will do the pledge, Ricky Hines. Please stand.
Let's pray. Lord, we give you thanks for this beautiful day you've given us. We thank you for the blessings we all enjoy. We just ask you to be with us now as we go about this agenda with the hopes that any and all decisions that we might make would be in the best interest of all parties, and ask that in your name. Amen.
Amen. Good. Face the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Mr. Penner. Okay. Next up, we have the approval of the August 15th meeting.
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
Have a motion and a second on the table for the approval of the minutes for August 15th. All in favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. Next up, Mr. James Rose.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Just a couple of administrative items before we get into our public hearing for tonight. Just wanted to let you know we've got several members that are rotating off after this board meeting, and you'll have 4 new members next time. So first up, if I can get Mr. Chair to step down, our people that are rotating off for various reasons, except for one, couldn't be here tonight. So if we could get Mr. Matt Nobles to step down. He is our representative from District 5, and he has served 2 full terms, so we appreciate his assistance on the board. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll just read this certificate of appreciation. It's presented to Matt Nobles in grateful appreciation for outstanding dedication while serving as a regular planning board member and also in some other capacities with the planning board from October 12th or 2012 through September 2018, and it's signed by our board chair as well as our liaison, Scott Elliott, and myself. And again, thank you, Matt, for all your good service.
Thank you, Matt.
And that's yours.
Thank you.
Any words of wisdom for us?
No, I just enjoyed serving, and I look forward to doing other things in our community in the future.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And then, just so you'll know who will be joining you at your next meeting, Steve Little is not a new face with us. He's coming back on board. He has served on the Board of Adjustment as well as our planning board previously. David Davenport from District 5, replacing Matt. Joseph Allen, District B. That, of course, is a combination district of 3 and 6. And then also Ashley Moore will be an at-large member. So with that, more than likely, we'll have an orientation session coming up with about a good third of your membership being brand new. So we'll probably be reaching out to you and advising you of that. It may be rolled into your next meeting in October. Okay. So with that, your big ticket item for tonight is our land use plan for the Southwest Bypass. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to turn it over to Eric to kind of introduce this topic.
Thank you.
Guess we'll look at it again.
All right, Mr. Chair.
Again, tonight we are holding a public hearing for the Southwest Bypass Corridor Land Use Plan. This has been a long process. We're kind of getting towards the end of it and working towards finishing this plan up. So tonight I'd like to introduce Jake Petrosky. He's our project manager with Stewart, who is our consultant that's been working with us on this project. And he's going to come up and give you all a presentation on the content of the plan, what it all entails, and if anybody's got any questions, feel free to answer or feel free to ask, and we'll try to answer as much as we can. And then following his presentation, we'll open up for the public hearing. We do have several folks in the audience tonight that are here for this item. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to introduce Jake Petrosky.
Great. Hey, how's everybody doing tonight?
Good evening.
Good. Well, I'm here to talk about the Southwest Bypass Land Use Plan. I'm going to talk a little bit about the overall plan framework and then some of the recommendations and some of the implementation steps that are recommended. And this is an overview of the plan. It has been out and available for public review for about a month now. So, we don't have a lot of time to go over every detail, but happy to answer more questions if you want some more clarity on any item. So the process was an 11-month process that began back in the fall of last year. And consisted of a number of steering committee meetings and stakeholder interviews, public meetings, an analysis phase, and development of different land use scenarios, and we got feedback on those, and then developed the plan and recommendations and implementation strategy. The steering committee did meet 6 times during the process. It was kind of a unique plan because it wasn't just the county doing a plan. The Southwest Bypass Corridor, as you know, traverses a number of jurisdictions. So there was representatives from the county, also the city of Greenville, towns of Winterville and Ayden, and then also NCDOT that participated in this plan. So it really was a coordinated effort to really look at the bypass area and define kind of what we wanted to happen around the bypass in the next 5 or 10 years. It is quite rare that you have a limited access freeway going through an area that has so many different types of areas within it. You have parts of the west sides of the towns in Greenville, but then you have that transitions to a much more rural context pretty quick in the county jurisdiction. So it's important for us to do this at this juncture because in less than 24 months the bypass will be open and there'll be a lot of demand for change along the bypass. So it's important for us to kind of set the framework and what we want to see around it. And as you can see on the schedule, the draft was available for a while, and then the goal is to have an eventual adoption within the next month or so. Public involvement was really critical to this planning effort. We felt like the county's comprehensive plan was still really relevant, and it was well done. But this area really needed some more attention, and we really needed to do the best job we could to reach out and hear from folks in this area and see how they wanted the area to grow in response to the bypass. Stakeholder interviews were really crucial at the beginning of the process. We met with a number of different groups, neighborhood groups, builders and developers, folks from the government side of things, and real estate folks, and just a cross-section of the community to really understand what the issues were so that we could kind of augment what we heard and what analysis that we were doing. So that happened in November in Winterville. There was a public meeting in April, and then a survey that stretched from March to April of this spring. We had 344 survey responses to that survey, which we felt was a pretty good response rate. And it was due in large part to coordinating with the staff of the towns and also outreach by different boards such as yourself and the steering committee members. So I think it was a commendable plan. Both public meetings were pretty well attended. We were quite busy during them, and I felt like it was a really productive conversation at each of those as well. So to summarize the public feedback, there's a lot of information on public feedback in the plan itself and also in the plan appendix that goes into detail what we heard at the public meetings and also what we heard through the survey. But a couple things that we definitely wanted to convey is we wanted to know what people valued most about southwestern Pitt County. And we always like to understand this because we don't want those things to go away. We want in the future to be able to say that what people value most is still really relevant. So people value the rural nature of it, the small town feel, the access and convenience of living in a in proximity to Greenville, but not necessarily in Greenville. We also asked what would you like to see in the southwest area of Pitt County as well. And kind of surprising, one of the first things that biggest priorities was recreational opportunities. And then second was protection of farms and open space and a need to manage growth and recognition that jobs and economic growth would be beneficial to the area as well, and more retail and restaurants. And in general, and then some specific things that people wanted to see. So we use that public feedback and working with the steering committee and looking at your past plans where you've documented kind of where you want the county to go and came up with a draft vision for this Southwest Bypass corridor. And the plan really is meant to move this vision forward and provide a coordinated approach to land use and infrastructure, schools, and utilities in the area surrounding the bypass, and to create well-designed and cohesive development that strengthens existing communities. So there was a big a push by the steering committee to make sure that we could say that there was a cohesive feel to the bypass corridor. So motorists didn't feel like, oh, we're going into this jurisdiction and we can certainly tell and that sort of thing. So I think just everybody involved really wanted to kind of think about that user experience a lot. And there's some recommendations that are geared towards that. But also balancing new employment, commercial, and residential areas with agricultural and open space preservation. During the first public meeting, we heard from a lot of farmers in the area that came out and were really concerned about what the bypass meant for them. You know, they kind of knew that this was going to lead to some growth pressure, and you've already seen that in the northern part of the county jurisdiction, and they were concerned, and they wanted to make sure that we were figuring out how to manage growth and accommodate it where it's appropriate, but also make sure that agriculture was still part of the southwest part of Pitt County in the future. So we've developed a future land use map for the bypass corridor, and that really outlines some character areas and where we want certain things to go and what we want the character of development to look like. This map is a slight departure from the existing comprehensive plan. A lot has changed since then. And some of the highlights of the plan include embracing some economic development opportunities along the corridor. The purple areas are potential future industrial, some existing industrial development as well, and red and brown areas are commercial and mixed use areas. And then also another kind of major recommendation in the plan is farmland preservation west of the bypass and in the Renston Historic District, which is identified as its own striped color on the map. But also identifying residential growth areas. We understand and have already seen that areas on the southwestern side of Greenville and western side of Winterville and Ayden are growing and understanding that that's going to continue in the future and might even accelerate. So we need to understand where those are and accommodate those in the expansion of towns where it's appropriate. The other thing this does is identify some new development types. There's not a lot of precedents in the study area, at least, but certainly there are in Greenville and neighboring counties. Mixed-use development, and that is those areas in Brown that, again, could accommodate a mix of residential uses, office uses, or commercial uses. Those areas really are in well-located sites that could be a combination of non-residential and residential uses. The market is really going to decide that, and those are meant to provide some flexibility and giving landowners some flexibility on what could go there. Also, traditional neighborhood development, which is the light tan. There's a few well-located sites near existing downtowns that might have a little bit of non-residential or commercial uses, but are really well suited for a mix of residential. And by mix of residential, there was a big preference for sale units and not so much apartments, but smaller lot, cottage home, patio home product, or for sale townhomes, stuff like that. And there was not there was an identified need for more of a mix of housing, especially on well-located sites. And then conservation design. The dark green is an area identified along Swift Creek and beside Renston, and that conservation design is really meant to be a context-sensitive approach to development that preserves natural resources as well as accommodating residential growth. A couple major policies, recommendations in the plan are as follows. I'm going to kind of go through them. Capitalize on opportunities for commercial and industrial development along the corridor. Currently, commercial or industrial uses only make up 5% of the land area in the study area. And as you all know, these types of non-residential uses typically contribute more to the tax rolls than they consume in services. So thinking about our long-term tax base along the corridor is important and something that we wanted to do and felt was, and it was one of those top 5 things we heard from the public and maybe ranked a little bit higher from what we heard from the steering committee. So that was really important throughout. So we want to encourage a mix of uses at key locations, those interchange locations, the areas on the west side of towns that are at the intersection of arterial roads or major thoroughfares. And that's really where plan development with the integration of commercial and residential uses is appropriate and encouraged in the plan. Also, we want to identify areas designated for large-scale commercial uses. Those could be the commercial areas. Those could also be the mixed-use areas. And then we wanted to limit strip development. That's something that we wanted to make sure, just in order to preserve mobility and traffic flow, and also make sure that we retain some of those qualities that people like about being in southwestern Pitt County, that strip commercial just doesn't extend to the county line. So thinking about that strategically, that also kind of reinforces those commercial and mixed-use areas that we did identify by not diluting that potential. The other thing we wanted to identify is some areas for context-sensitive commercial and office uses. There's some areas in the study area that already have a lot of residential growth. And there is going to be some development pressure to develop commercial uses at key intersections. And that's appropriate, but we want to make sure that the scale and design of those new non-residential developments really are sensitive to the residential uses that exist or could exist. So that could be by limiting types of commercial to discourage conflict with residential, or encouraging design features that mitigate traffic noise or light impacts. And those are the light pink areas on the map. The other thing we wanted to do is identify some new employment areas. And some of this was reinforcing things that were on existing plans, the Greenville plan in particular, and then also the town plans as well. We wanted to encourage industrial office and flex uses in industrial areas identified on the future land use map, those purple areas. And some of these areas are the most suitable in the county for larger industrial, flex, technology, or manufacturing uses, distribution uses as well. They're really well located. There's parts of the study area, particularly in the north, that have access to rail. But also there's other areas that have access to utilities, and they're also going to have direct access to the new bypass as well, which is really attractive for many new employers looking to be able to access a facility like that and get to Raleigh really quickly, or get to points south when some of the improvements farther down on 11 are finished. But part of that is also setting the table for what we want, but also discouraging some things that could be in conflict with that. So discouraging large-scale residential subdivisions in some of those areas might be something that we want to consider doing, and that is a policy recommendation as well. The other thing we wanted to do was protect agriculture in the study area. We wanted to encourage only very low-density, small-scale residential development in the agricultural areas identified west of the bypass. That's that light green area. So new residential development should be at a very low density, averaging 1 dwelling unit per acre or above, preserving existing trees, and be limiting the size to not cause traffic impacts on rural roads, and designed in such a way as to not provide conflicts for existing agricultural operations. The other thing that was really clear is that Renston Historic District was a different animal. We wanted to update zoning regulations for the Renston Historic District. Currently, zoning regulations in place do not necessarily accomplish what the district really wants, what people in the district really want, according to what we've heard during this process. So the focus of the district could be a number of things. It could be preserving historic properties, views, and working agriculture, or discouraging certain kinds of commercial uses, or requiring certain design features in order to make sure that that fits into the character of the district. More work definitely needs to be done on that, and there's probably some short-term and long-term changes that we can make. Another thing we wanted to encourage is new quality residential growth. So the plan identifies areas for low-density subdivisions, also recommends some higher standards for neighborhoods if there are smaller lots, and encourages conservation subdivision in areas that are identified as conservation design on the future land use map. So those conservation design areas would allow for flexibility in minimum lot size in exchange for higher amounts of open space, parks, trails, and other amenities. It would be contingent upon the density, overall density would be contingent upon access to utilities, quality of soils, what it's next to, and all that. But basically it's saying there's some ways to incentivize good design where we want some natural resources to be saved, and we want to be sensitive to agricultural and that sort of thing. There was a lot of discussion about infrastructure from the stakeholder interviews all the way through the process. And it was identified early on that there's a few things that are really going to drive growth and development in the study area. The location of utilities and access to utilities, and the location of schools. So there are some recommendations in this plan related to both those things to clarify what we really want to see in order to support the land use plan on the utility side of things. One recommendation is to update interlocal agreements to factor in the economic development potential at interchange locations. Currently, there is identified interlocal agreement between Winterville and Creedmoor, or not Creedmoor, but Greenville and Winterville, but it doesn't necessarily extend all the way to the interchange locations. So having the conversation about updating that interlocal agreement in addition to coordinating with Aiden is going to be beneficial to making sure that we're not leaving some opportunities on the table. So updating county and municipal policy accordingly is going to be important, and working with Greenville Utilities and Winterville and Aiden is recommended. Aesthetics are really important. It's part of the user experience. What you see as you're driving along the bypass is really going to dictate, how people view Pitt County, how people view Greenville, and the experience that they have getting off of the Southwest Bypass and traveling into town is going to be really your first impression to a lot of folks, or a repeated impression if you're commuting to and from Greenville. But nonetheless, it's important. So improving regulations on billboards and buffers is recommended. You all have pretty good ordinances and regulations on billboards. The billboard recommendation really was targeted towards the towns, because some of them don't have any regulations hardly on those. So thinking about if they annex a part within their ETJ near the bypass, understanding that they need to have their regulations updated in order to factor in that new demand is going to be important. Buffers is important as well. One thing that people didn't want to see is a lot of backs of houses or backs of buildings or car lots or that sort of thing. So requiring a preservation of tree buffers in higher intensity areas is a way that we can kind of control what people see along the bypass. And in some instances, this has been implemented elsewhere, and it really does change the character of the roadway pretty significantly, or preserves the character of the area in this case, because you already have a lot of tree cover and farms along the bypass. You really don't have much development. So really it's a preventive measure that is recommended. Also, there was a lot of concern about light pollution, so encouraging or requiring full cutoff lights to reduce light pollution is recommended. Creating attractive gateways through development design is something that could be important in those mixed-use and commercial areas near the interchanges. So factoring in building orientation and parking lot design that brings building a little closer to the street and requires a minimum amount of landscaping is going to clean up or make sure that new development adds to the county and the jurisdictions. Also coordinating with NCDOT in between jurisdictions on beautification projects and right-of-way plantings, plant pallets, that sort of thing can really help create that unified experience from the bypass. We also looked at a number of transportation issues in the area. NCDOT does a real good job of looking at the interchange areas and immediate potential issues during the design process, but we wanted to kind of double check some of those assumptions, particularly in this area because it's been growing so quickly. A lot of the bypass designs didn't necessarily take into account what has happened even in the last 2 or 3 years. So it was important for us to look at potential improvements and note those that were being considered by NCDOT in the green, and then also recommend some additional improvements in some areas for future study. Some of the areas of concern on the transportation side of things are US 13 and Davenport Farm road area. There might need to be an additional turn lane to create 2 right turn lanes there. NC 102 interchange, there might need to be an additional right turn lane to the Cloverleaf ramp. And the NC 11 Fire Tower Road intersection, we did look at that a lot. We might need to consider intersection modifications to handle the new traffic where those 2 roadways come together, kind of on the very east end of the study area. There was also some areas that we wanted to just identify for the benefit of the MPO, so they would know there could be some things that need future study. And these were generally outside of the study or on the edges of the study area. One is Stantonsburg Road intersections after the bypass meets up with 64. A lot of people are going to be trying to make that right turn and go into Greenville. So you probably are going to have some backups at those lights, even though people can get to Greenville really quickly. Once they get there, they might have to sit through a couple light cycles. So thinking about how to make those intersections work as efficiently as possible is going to be beneficial. And also some of the NC11 intersections, long-term, might need to be looked at. In the short term, NC11 is going to change character, but we do see with facilities of this caliber an equilibrium of sorts after a number of years where people kind of self-select whether to take the bypass or NC11 based on which one's quicker. And so you'll see a lot of less traffic on NC11 initially, but with the growth in the area, it's still important to think about that long-term mobility along 11. Also, recreation and open space, as I mentioned, was a priority. So coordinating with schools and other entities to locate parks, a park site west of Winterville in an area that's currently underserved by parks is important. Reviewing open space standards for residential zoning districts and making sure that new growth actually contributes a little bit to recreational amenities so that the county's not looked at to foot the bill and provide those in every part of the study area is going to be important. Also, feasibility studies for planned greenways and identifying potential alignments and costs and that sort of thing is really going to be really helpful for going after grant monies. And some of the towns are already doing that. And Winterville is updating their greenway plan and doing some feasibility studies, so that's really encouraging. And then also updating those plans to reflect the future land use. So those are the kind of policy level recommendations. There's some implementation steps that are identified in the back of the plan and elaborated on. The first and kind of obvious one is adopt the future, the land use plan and consider during rezonings and or plan updates. For you all, it would be an adoption and consider this during rezonings in this area. For the towns, it's kind of optional. Whether they want to adopt the plan as is or incorporate some of the ideas and those policy recommendations as they update their plans. Updating local land use regulations to be consistent with this plan is also another step. In some cases, the existing land use regulations are consistent with this plan, but there's a few areas where some updates may be needed, particularly to allow some mixed-use development types, to encourage neighborhood commercial that's appropriate, and also to protect agricultural in that area, and also accommodate development that folks in Renton want to see, and making sure that their interests are appropriately reflected in the zoning ordinance. It's not necessarily a panacea, but it's one of the best tools we have in order to bring to fruition the recommendations in the land use plan. Also, adopting coordinated standards for visual buffering and development along the bypass, improving standards for residential development, coordinating to focus new school sites east of the bypass and not west of the bypass in the agricultural area. Land might be a little bit more expensive east of the bypass, but if we do put a school west of the bypass, there are going to be implications and there are going to be a lot of new residential demand there, and it will impact agriculture. Also, considering establishing urban service areas for jurisdictions or utility service providers to clarify who will provide and extend water and sewer services and how the county interacts with that is really important. Understanding that there's going to be new growth and development pressures in here, and understanding that we need to protect water quality and maybe have some updates to our stormwater standards, and that's listed twice accidentally. And that's it. So that's kind of an overview of the plan. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Jake. Eric?
just had one quick question.
I'm sorry.
I guess for the traffic recommendations, the last couple of intersections, was that based on public comment, or was that based on some analysis done at those?
So what we did is we had an engineering firm on our team, WSP, and they took a look at model runs from the most recent bypass forecast. So they did existing year transportation model runs and then also future year model runs. They factored that into account. They also looked at the regional model forecasts and also did some intersection analysis just based on what we were intending in terms of the future land use plan. So they did the network analysis, and that was really from them, really looking at those edges of where DOT was looking at and considering with, because they have to draw a line somewhere, right? They can't study, the whole region when they're designing the bypass, but those edges, it really needed some care and attention, and that's what we focused on.
So it was looking at those after you looked at what you were proposing for the land use plan, what was going to necessarily be needed for the future intersections in those areas?
And it was something that, there probably needs to be a little bit more modeling. The MPO is updating their traffic model right now and their socioeconomic data forecast, so their population and employment forecast. They're going to use this future land use plan as a basis for that. So here shortly, we're going to have a lot clearer picture.
Okay.
But at least it provides some direction to the MPO saying, okay, once we get those new model runs, let's take a look at these areas because we might have to, modify our long-range plan and some of our priority projects accordingly.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions, Jack, before we open it up for public hearing, right?
Yes, we'll just kind of talk a little briefly about some of our next steps here. Again, this is just the first of 2 public hearings. The planning board will be making a recommendation tonight to the Board of County Commissioners, and they'll be having a second public hearing in October. So we'll be advertising that, publicizing that, trying to get more people to come to the Commissioners meeting in October that might be interested. But again, this will be the first of such public hearings for tonight. But a couple things I did want to mention. You have to excuse me, I'm a little hoarse today. But the Southwest Bypass Plan Steering Committee did review the draft plan on August 16th. And they did vote unanimously to endorse and to recommend adoption of the proposed plan. Ricky and Ms. Fay were both instrumental in serving on that committee, along with a few other members from the planning boards from Greenville, Winterville, and Ayden. We also had our staff, municipal staff, and folks from TUC and NCDOT also helped with that steering committee. So again, that recommendation did come from them. It was a unanimous recommendation for adoption. So this time we would like to entertain public comments and open up the public hearing. The planning board will then make a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, and again, they are scheduled to hold a separate public hearing to consider adoption of this plan on October 15th. So with that, Mr. Chair, we'd like to open up the public hearing.
Okay. Before we open up the public hearing, keep in mind when you come up to the podium, make sure you state your name, your address, and you will have 3 minutes to speak on the topic. Tab, do we have anyone? Name that we have here is Miss Carol Tyndall.
I think I just did ask my question privately.
Okay, all right, thank you. Is there anyone else that didn't have a chance to sign up would like to speak now? If not, consider the public hearing closed.
Okay. And Mr. Chair, we do have 2 recommendations for how the board could act tonight. In front of you is a resolution for the approval of the plan. First is to recommend adoption of the proposed Southwest Bypass Land Use Plan in accordance with the recommendation of the steering committee. Then the second action will be to recommend also amendment of the 2030 comprehensive land use plan to refer to the Southwest Bypass land use plan. Because again, what we would end up with is essentially two overlaying land use recommendations. And so what this would do is amend that map in the comprehensive land use plan to sort of gray out the area that you see on the screen so that it would refer back to the policy recommendations and the future land use designations of the Southwest Bypass plan.
Okay. All right. Do I hear any motions?
I'll make a motion that we recommend adoption and include the recommended amendment to be in accordance with the plan.
Okay. Have a motion on the floor. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Ms. Faye.
Oh, yes.
I'm sorry. Okay. So have a motion and a second on the floor to adopt the resolution with the amendment, correct? All right. All in favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you.
All right, thank you. And again, just for information, if anybody has any that might be watching tonight or anybody that's in the audience tonight, if they have any questions or would like to ask anything of myself or Jake, again, we're here tonight. This is our contact information on the screen also. And also, we have our project website. It's pittcountync.gov/SW bypass plan. The draft plan is available on there for review. It's also got a link to a survey. If anybody has any comments they want to submit, we'll still take public comment and public input pretty much all the way up to the Board of County Commissioners. So I would encourage people to still go on there and review that plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
And again, I'd like to extend my appreciation to both the chair and Ms. Fay. We had a number of steering committee meetings, and they were diligent at arriving and being part of our meetings, public meetings out at Pitt Community College too. So again, thank you for your service. A few informational items just to bring to your attention. Several of them deal with DOT-related items, and specifically, you might have seen the municipal agreements with DOT for betterments along Evans Street and Old Tar Road as well as 14th Street. Well, basically that refers to sidewalks. So what the county why the county was involved with that was simply because some of that area is still within unincorporated Pitt County. We were a part of the agreement, but we're not providing any funding for that, thanks to the city of Greenville and the town of Winterville. So those improvements will have sidewalks to go along with them. The other DOT-related items deal primarily with the additions to the state road system, and I'd just like to point out that some really goes back to some of your good work in the past where we amended our subdivision regulations, and in turn we go out annually to do inspections of any of those proposed public streets. And as a friendly reminder to the developers, we let them know there might be some problems with the streets, or those streets are ready to be petitioned to be taken over by DOT. We've learned valuable lessons through the past with those roads staying out there. If they're not petitioned for acceptance by DOT, they could fall into disrepair. So I think our friendly reminder as part of some of the subdivision changes that have gone on have encouraged people to go ahead and bring those roads onto the state system as soon as possible. And so you can see the end result of several of those. Another item certainly to bring to your attention is the closeout, finally, of the 2013 Community Development Block Grant for this Candlewick Sewer Project. And we now have the homes connected to the system's up and running, and if all goes well, we should completely finish that within the next couple of months. The other item, just as an improvement, we also are involved with recreational planning, and the recommendation for naming the basketball and pickleball courts a new improvement out at our district park. And This is the end result, and if you haven't been by there, this pad has been laid down with some good donations from the Dickerson family, and that is actually Phil Dickerson's son who has provided the donations, and in turn, the commissioners have now consented to have this named after Phil Dickerson. So Phil was our former county engineer, was very instrumental in the development plans for the district park back some 15 years ago. So if you're not familiar with pickleball, Google it. It's basically a combination of sorts between badminton and tennis. There could be a net extended across the white lines on the screen here, are basically the courts for 2 pickleball courts, and that is quite an interesting game, and I will say our senior game participants are very excited about having these courts available to them in the near future. Couple of other things. Certainly, you've got some information in your package tonight, one being some of the articles, one dealing with the snagging efforts. You might remember the county had received funding to go out and actually remove storm-related debris after Hurricane Matthew from Little Contentney and Contentney Creek. No sooner than we got that started, we pulled those contractors out because Hurricane Florence came in. And certainly the creek has risen, and there's probably more debris there now. So we'll be working further to get that remobilized, hopefully in the near future. Also, just as an update, certainly when your package went out, we were getting very much prepared for Hurricane Florence. Understand that several of you in the southern end of the county didn't receive your packages because the Fayetteville post office has been closed for a while. So in turn, we also have been making preparations. We were involved with the Emergency Operations Center during the height of the storm, and in turn after that, we've been making preparations to go out and do the damage assessments out in the field for any structures that were damaged. Several of these structures are the same ones that were damaged during Hurricane Matthew. So we're actively working with some of these clients, trying to get the properties bought out or repaired or replaced. So we just were on a phone call yesterday with folks from the state, and I will say this project, our projects associated with Hurricane Matthew, might be a little bit expedited now just simply because of some of the damage that's been incurred after Hurricane Florence. So we'll keep you posted on that, but we do hope to get the snagging efforts back online and in turn get some of these houses repaired or replaced fairly soon. With that, Mr. Chairman, that's all we've got for tonight unless you have any questions.
Before we adjourn, I'd just like to thank Matt for his service. Along with Kenneth, Clay, and Anthony, we really appreciate y'all taking your time out to serve us here on the board and help the county out. And again, thank you. And also to Ms. Fay with the help. The Southwest Bypass started back in November 2017, and to Eric and James and all your staff, James, a great job. And to the other municipalities and everybody, Greenville and Greenville Utilities, it was a great group of people to work with, and I think everybody had the same goal, same mission in mind, to help enhance Pitt County as a whole. And I think when we work together like that, we can do things together. And I thought it came together real well. And thank you, Stewart Company, for all the advice. With that being said, we can adjourn.